Hey everyone. I never thought I'd be here sharing my story like this, but I don't even know what else to do. My name's Shanti, and I'm an architect. Got my own firm, and I thought I had a pretty good life, a wife, 2 kids, and a business I'd built from scratch. But the last few months, they've been a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. It all started when my daughter Carrie, who's 14, came back from a weekend at our family's vacation home. I'd been working late that weekend and couldn't join them, so Miriam, my wife, went up there with the kids. I thought it'd be a good break for everyone. But turns out, it was a break for someone else. Carrie's been my rock since all this went down. She's sharp for her age, observant, and got a sense for when things aren't right. That weekend, she saw something she shouldn't have, her own mother, my wife of 16 years, with my business partner Rick. Rick, the guy I'd trusted, the one I'd been building this business with. Carrie saw them together, saw how close they were, and something about it bothered her. She even managed to record a conversation between them, something I'd never expect from her, but thank God she did. I remember when she showed me the video, her hands shaking. "Dad," she whispered, "you need to see this." And there it was, Miriam and Rick talking about me, about plans to get rid of me, to take over the firm. The worst part? They were talking about the kids too, about how they'd make sure she'd get custody if things blew up. My stomach turned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After Carrie showed me that video, I went numb. Watching it felt like getting punched, like the air had been sucked right out of my chest. My own wife and my own business partner, plotting against me like that, like I was nothing. And then there was Carrie, just standing there, looking like she'd seen a ghost. I pulled her close, trying to wrap my head around everything. It was tough to even look at her because I could see how much it had broken her, too. And she's just a kid. She shouldn't have had to carry a weight like that. "What exactly did you see?" I asked her, hoping maybe she'd misunderstood something, or I'd wake up and find out this was all just some nightmare. They were hugging and talking," she said, voice shaking. "Mom kept saying she was tired of being with you, that she felt trapped. And Rick, he kept saying that once you were out of the picture they'd be free." She was trembling, so I hugged her tighter. I had to stay calm, at least for her and her little brother Tony, who was 10 and still innocent enough not to have a clue what was going on. The idea of Miriam, my wife, betraying our family like this was bad enough, but with Rick? That was betrayal on a level I couldn't have imagined. Carrie pulled out her phone and played the recording. It was shaky, and I could hear her breathing heavy in the background. But Miriam and Rick's voices were clear. In the recording, Miriam was saying something like, "Once Shant is out of the way, we can do things right. The business will be ours, and you know I'll get the kids." Rick's voice was smug, almost mocking. "Don't worry, Miriam. I know how to handle him. He'll have nothing left, and then you and I will get what we deserve." My hands were clenched so tight I thought I might crush my own bones. That was enough proof for me. Rick was going to take my business, and Miriam wanted to take my kids. It was like a knife twisting, over and over. I knew I had to do something, but in that moment, I was too stunned to think straight. I thanked Carrie, told her how brave she was, and did my best to reassure her. Then I just sat in my office, staring at the walls, feeling my world fall apart around me. The next day, while I was still trying to process all of this, Carrie and Tony came up to me with more recordings. This time, Carrie had managed to get more than just whispers. There were full conversations where Miriam and Rick were discussing their next steps, from getting custody of the kids to liquidating assets in my name. They even talked about some shady legal angles to make sure everything in the business fell into Rick's hands. They'd thought of everything. Carrie and Tony looked up at me, and I could see the hurt and anger in their eyes. They'd seen their mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect them, planning to hurt their dad. That changed things for me. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about protecting my kids. I realized I wasn't going to let them take anything from me without a fight. That's when I made my first call to Elsa, Rick's wife. Elsa was sharp and didn't take any nonsense, and she was also one of the best family lawyers in town. She picked up, and I didn't even have to explain much. She already knew something was off. "Elsa," I said, barely keeping my voice steady, "I think we need to talk. It's about Rick and my wife." She went quiet, then answered, "Meet me tomorrow morning. And bring any proof you have." The wheels were finally starting to turn, and as awful as it felt, I was gearing up for what was about to be the fight of my life. The next morning, I met Elsa at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. I was half expecting her to walk out the minute I showed her the recording. But instead, she listened, her expression tightening with every word Miriam and Rick said. By the end, her face was pale, her jaw clenched. "They're planning all of this right under our noses," I muttered, still barely able to believe it myself. Elsa took a deep breath, then looked me straight in the eye. "This is disgusting. But don't worry, Shanti, I know exactly how to handle this. We're going to make sure they don't touch a single thing that's yours." Over the next couple of days, Elsa and I worked late into the night, laying out a plan to secure my assets, protect my firm, and set up the groundwork for a custody battle. Every time we found a legal loophole or blocked one of Rick's schemes, I felt a small piece of strength come back. I wasn't helpless in this. Carrie and Tony were still in it with me, keeping their heads down and pretending like they didn't know a thing. They were the bravest kids I'd ever seen, and it broke me that they were going through this. At home, I kept playing the part of the unsuspecting husband. Miriam kept up her usual lies, acting like nothing was wrong, maybe even more affectionate than before. But now I knew every smile, every kiss was just a mask. It fueled me to keep going, to see this through to the end. Elsa had my back, and my kids were standing by me. We were ready for whatever came next. As days went by, Elsa and I worked quietly, setting up legal barriers and securing as much of the business as we could. With her expertise, we got my personal assets legally separated, set up trust accounts for the kids, and even started drafting papers to dissolve Rick's involvement in the firm. Elsa wasn't just doing her job, she was on a mission. Every time she found a way to block Miriam and Rick, I saw the fire in her eyes burn hotter. Then came the night when Miriam decided to bring up concerns about my business. I was at the dinner table with her and the kids, forcing myself to play nice. She put on a concerned look and said, "You know, Rick was mentioning that the firm's finances seem strained. I'm worried, Shanti. Maybe it's time to look at selling some assets, or even other options." My heart pounded, but I played along, acting oblivious. "Strained? We're doing fine, Miriam. Actually, I've got some new projects lined up that'll be great for the firm." Carrie looked up at me from across the table, her eyes narrowing as she picked up on her mother's lie. Tony, meanwhile, just stared down at his plate, completely unaware of the tension between his parents. Miriam didn't drop her fake concern. "Well, Rick was saying it's risky for us not to look at all our options," she pressed, her tone almost scolding. "We have to be smart about our future." I kept my voice steady. "I think we're fine as we are, Miriam. But I'll look into it if it makes you feel better." Inside, I was furious. She was trying to push me into weakening my own business, one small step toward handing it over to Rick. But she had no idea I'd already protected the firm from whatever they were plotting. Later that night, I texted Elsa, filling her in on Miriam's latest concern. Her response was immediate. "She's fishing to see if you're suspicious. Keep playing dumb. We're ahead of them." It wasn't easy to keep playing the role, but the look in my kids' eyes every day reminded me I didn't have a choice. I had to see this through. Miriam and Rick thought they had it all planned out. They had no idea we were building a case against them, step by step. The weeks that followed felt like a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Miriam and Rick kept sneaking around, while Carrie and Tony continued gathering evidence. Every night, Carrie would bring me new recordings, each more damning than the last. Hearing Miriam and Rick laugh about their plans, their cruel confidence in my supposed cluelessness, it was like pouring salt into a wound every time. One night, Carrie showed me a recording where Rick openly mocked me. "Shanta's a fool. He trusts me with his firm like I'm family. When we're done, he won't know what hit him." And Miriam, she actually laughed along with him, saying, "He'll go down quietly. He's too proud to fight back. And once we're done, he'll be out of our lives for good." Hearing my own wife speak about me like that was a new level of pain. But every time I listened to those recordings, it fueled me to keep going. I wasn't just doing this for me, I was doing it for Carrie and Tony. I wanted them to know that when push came to shove, their dad wouldn't just stand by and take it. Elsa worked tirelessly to build our case, and each piece of evidence Carrie and Tony brought us strengthened our position. We were so close to sealing it all up and making our move. At work, I acted as if nothing was wrong, showing up to meetings with Rick, pretending I was the same clueless business partner he thought he was fooling. But then one morning, he slipped up. Rick barged into my office, frustration written all over his face. "Shanti, I think we need to talk about these legal adjustments you're making to the firm's accounts." I'm starting to get the feeling you're hiding something, he said, trying to sound casual. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. Legal adjustments? Just making sure everything's in order, Rick. Nothing unusual. But I'm happy to go over it with you, line by line. He blinked, caught off guard by my confidence, and muttered something about just keeping things transparent. I could tell he was rattled. Maybe for the first time, he realized he wasn't holding all the cards. As he walked out, I shot Elsa a quick message. She replied right away, "Stay calm. Let him worry. We're almost there." For the first time in weeks, I felt a real glimmer of hope. Rick and Miriam's web of lies was starting to unravel, and soon they'd be caught in it. That weekend, Elsa and I met up again to finalize our plan. We sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of files, every single one filled with proof that Rick and Miriam were conspiring against me. Elsa had a steely focus, flipping through pages and organizing everything like she was preparing for a battle. And in a way she was. "We have enough," she said firmly, looking up at me. "More than enough, actually. They won't see it coming. This week, we're making our move." Hearing that should have felt like a victory, but I was drained. The betrayal, the lies, it was wearing me down. Elsa must have noticed because she put a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Shanti. For you, for your kids. This is how you take back control." I nodded, pulling myself together. She was right. I couldn't let Rick and Miriam's twisted plans break me. I had too much to lose. So we went over the details, setting up every step so that Rick and Miriam wouldn't have a way out once we confronted them. On Monday, I went to the office like usual, but this time, I was the one with a plan. Rick was in the conference room, flipping through some files when I walked in. He looked up, giving me that same smug grin he always wore when he thought he was a step ahead. "Morning, Shanti. Ready for another busy week," he said, too casually. I forced a smile. "Always, Rick. Got a few new projects I want us to look at. Thought you'd be interested." I handed him a folder, the first part of the setup. Inside was paperwork that hinted at changes I'd made to the firm, ones that effectively blocked him from touching any major assets without my approval. I'd made it look like a simple restructuring, but I knew he'd see through it. I wanted him to. His smile faded as he skimmed the pages, realizing what was happening. "What exactly is this?" he asked, trying to keep his cool. "Just some updates to make sure the business is protected," I replied smoothly. "Can't be too careful these days." For the first time, Rick looked nervous. I watched him fidget, caught off guard and scrambling for control. I wanted him to feel that, to understand he wasn't the one pulling the strings anymore. Later that day, Elsa confirmed the final piece of our plan was in place. We'd prepared documents to remove Rick from the business entirely, pending legal action. The confrontation was set for Friday, and with the mountains of evidence we had, there was no way he or Miriam could wriggle out of it. All that was left was to wait. Friday finally came, and I was ready. Elsa and I had set up a meeting with Rick under the pretense of discussing some urgent matters about the firm's future. Meanwhile, I'd told Miriam I had an important announcement to make at home that evening. I wanted them both off balance, both waiting for something they couldn't quite see coming. Rick walked into the meeting room, his usual confidence a little shaky. I could tell he suspected something was off, but he didn't have a clue how big of a bomb was about to drop. Elsa was already there, a stack of documents in front of her, a calm but fierce look on her face. "Take a seat, Rick," she said, gesturing to the chair across from us. Rick hesitated, then sat, forcing a smile. "What's all this?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Elsa leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him. "We've reviewed some issues regarding the firm's finances and management, and I think it's time to clear a few things up." She slid a folder across the table, filled with the proof Carrie and Tony had collected, as well as legal documents showing his removal from the business. Rick's face paled as he flipped through it, each page spelling out exactly what he'd been caught doing. His hands started to shake. "You thought you could steal from me, take what I built, and walk away unscathed," I said, my voice low but steady. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Rick swallowed, trying to regain his composure. "Shanti, I don't know what you're talking about. This is some kind of misunderstanding." Elsa didn't give him a chance to finish. "We have recordings, Rick, of you and Miriam plotting against Shanti, discussing how you'd take the firm, manipulate the custody situation, even go after his personal assets." She raised an eyebrow, daring him to deny it. Rick's face turned red, and he clenched his fists. "You think you can just push me out like this? I have rights in this business." "Not anymore," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on him. "As of this moment, you're out. We've filed all the paperwork. Any attempt to retaliate, and I'll release these recordings and every single piece of evidence we have to the court, and to everyone you know." Rick looked between us, realizing he had no escape. The smugness, the confidence, it all drained from his face, replaced by pure desperation. He tried to say something, but Elsa cut him off. "You can leave now, Rick," she said coldly. "And if I were you, I'd get a good lawyer. You're going to need one." Without another word, Rick stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I let out a long breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I was free of him, and the firm was safe. Now, there was only one more confrontation left: Miriam. That evening, I came home to find Miriam waiting for me in the living room, looking unusually composed. She dressed up, like she was ready to charm her way through whatever she thought was coming. I could see she sensed something big, but she was putting on that calm front, the one I used to believe meant she was on my side. Now, I knew better. "Shanti," she began, her voice soft, "you said you wanted to talk. Is everything okay?" I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. "More than okay, Miriam. Today, Rick was officially removed from the firm. Permanently." Her face went blank for a second before she forced a smile. "Oh? That's sudden. I didn't realize you had any issues with Rick." I studied her for a moment, watching her scramble to keep up her facade. "You know, it's funny. All this time, I thought I had a partner in him, and a partner in you." I could see the mask slipping, just slightly. "Shanti, what are you trying to say?" Her voice wavered, and she looked away, fidgeting with her wedding ring. I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings Carrie had given me. The audio filled the room, Miriam's voice as clear as day, saying, "Once Shanti's out of the way, we can do things right. The business will be ours, and you know I'll get the kids." I watched as the color drained from her face. She looked up, eyes wide with shock. "Shanti, I can explain." "Explain." I interrupted, the anger finally spilling over. "Explain how you plan to take everything I've worked for, everything I care about, and leave me with nothing? You were planning to destroy me, Miriam, and you didn't even blink." She reached out, as if touching my arm would somehow smooth it all over. I didn't mean it. "Rick," he pressured me. I wasn't thinking straight. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, pulling away. "I heard every word. You weren't pressured. You were a willing partner in this betrayal. And now, you're out of chances." She stood there, stunned, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "You're being unfair, Shanti. Think about the kids." "I am thinking about them," I replied, my voice cold. "That's why I'm filing for full custody. I've seen what kind of mother you are when you think no one's watching. And I won't let you drag them down with you." Her face twisted with rage as she realized she'd lost control of the situation. "You think you're the hero here? You're breaking up this family." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of calm. "No, Miriam. You broke at the moment you chose to betray us. Now, I'm just making sure the pieces are put back right." She stared at me, speechless, as I walked out of the room, finally done with her lies. After my confrontation with Miriam, I knew the next conversation wouldn't be any easier. Carrie and Tony deserved the truth, or at least a version of it they could understand. I found them both in Carrie's room, huddled close together. Carrie must have sensed something was coming, while Tony just looked up with that innocent, trusting face that nearly broke me. I sat down on the edge of Carrie's bed, taking a deep breath. "Kids, there are some things I need to tell you. Things are going to change around here." Carrie nodded, her eyes steady, ready. She'd already guessed what was coming. "It's about Mom, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, then at Tony, whose wide-eyed stare was filled with confusion. "Yes, Carrie. It's about her, and Rick too." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, she made some choices that hurt our family. It's why things have felt different lately." Tony, still too young to fully understand, furrowed his brow. "What did she do?" I reached out, putting a hand on his shoulder. "She and Rick made some decisions that weren't right for us. Because of that, I'll be taking care of you both, just me. Mom will still be in your lives, but we won't be living together like before." Carrie's face tightened, but she stayed silent, watching Tony closely, like she was already trying to protect him. "Does that mean we won't see her every day?" Tony asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "Yes, but you'll still get to spend time with her. And I promise, you'll always have me here, whenever you need." Carrie put her arm around her brother, whispering something to calm him down. Then she looked back at me. "Dad, we'll be okay, won't we?" I nodded, feeling that strange mix of heartbreak and pride as I looked at her. "Yes, we will. We're going to make it through this, together." The three of us sat in silence, a small, steadying moment in the middle of the storm. The road ahead was going to be rough, but at least now, we were ready to face it as a team. The weeks that followed were tense, like walking through a minefield. Miriam had lawyered up fast, claiming she deserved equal rights with the kids. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. After everything she'd done, she still had the nerve to fight for custody. But I had Elsa, and with every step, she made sure Miriam's lies were met with hard evidence. The custody hearings started quietly, with each side laying out what they thought was best for the children. Miriam's lawyer painted her as a loving mother, devoted and caring, conveniently ignoring the recordings and the betrayal. But Elsa came prepared. When Miriam's lawyer hinted that I was financially reckless in managing the firm, Elsa flipped through our neatly organized stack of evidence, raising one of the recordings. "Your Honor, we have substantial proof that Mrs. Foster was conspiring to take down her own husband's business and seize control of his assets," Elsa stated, her voice calm but fierce. The room went silent as she played a clip of Miriam's voice discussing her plans with Rick. The judge's face changed, and Miriam's calm facade started to crack. She looked over at me, eyes full of rage and panic. But she couldn't deny it, not with her own voice filling the courtroom. Over the following days, Elsa presented more and more of our evidence. She laid out each part of Miriam's plan, her manipulation, her complete disregard for our kids. And while Miriam kept trying to put on a show of innocence, every new recording exposed her true intentions. By the end of the hearings, it was obvious to everyone in that room who Miriam really was. After the final session, Miriam tried to confront me in the hallway. "You're destroying this family," she hissed, her voice barely holding back anger. "You think you're protecting them, but you're just making things worse." I looked her dead in the eye. "No, Miriam. I'm just making sure they have a real family, one that isn't built on lies." With that, I walked away, feeling like a huge weight had finally been lifted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. The fight wasn't over, but I knew we were close to getting the peace my kids and I deserved. After weeks of tense waiting, the day finally came when the judge called us back to the courtroom. I sat with Elsa beside me, feeling the weight of every word the judge was about to say. Miriam was there too, her lawyer whispering reassurances, but she looked different. The confidence was gone. There was a nervousness I'd never seen in her before. The judge began with a summary of the evidence. He spoke carefully, outlining Miriam and Rick's recorded conversations, the plans to manipulate custody, and the attempts to secure my assets under Rick's control. Every sentence felt like a hammer, each word confirming what I'd been fighting to prove, that Miriam's actions had put her own interests above our children's well-being. Finally, the judge looked at Miriam, then at me. "Mr. Foster, the court recognizes your commitment to your children's stability and safety. It's clear that you have their best interests at heart and that you've worked to ensure they are protected, even under these difficult circumstances." I held my breath, barely daring to hope. The court awards full custody of Carrie and Tony to Mr. Foster. Mrs. Foster will have visitation rights, but these will be supervised until the court determines it's appropriate to revisit the arrangement. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I could hardly process it. It was over. Carrie and Tony were safe, and Miriam wouldn't be able to manipulate them, not with those restrictions in place. I glanced at Elsa, who gave me a firm nod of approval, her face softening just a bit. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Miriam. Her face was a mix of anger and desperation, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of regret. But then I remembered everything she'd done, every lie, every betrayal. That look was just the consequence of her own choices. I walked out of that courtroom with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't just a victory for me, it was a new beginning for my kids and me. We could finally leave this chapter behind. In the days following the verdict, the house felt different. It wasn't just that Miriam was gone, it was as if the air itself had lightened. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe, and I could see that Carrie and Tony felt it too. Carrie especially seemed to be thriving. She'd always been mature for her age, but I could tell this whole mess had weighed heavily on her. Now, she didn't have to keep secrets or worry about her mom's plans. She'd even started joining me in the evenings to work on little home projects, like repainting the deck and fixing up the garden, things I'd let slide over the last few chaotic months. One evening, we were working side by side, painting, when she looked over at me. "Dad, are we really done with all of this?" she asked, her voice cautious, as if afraid to believe it was real. I put down the paintbrush and looked her in the eye. "Yeah, Carrie. We're done. It's just us now." I gave her shoulder a squeeze, and she smiled, a real, genuine smile I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a reminder of what this fight had all been for. Tony, still a bit young to fully grasp everything, had his own questions. One night as I was tucking him in, he looked up and asked, "Mom's still gonna see us sometimes, right?" I nodded, brushing his hair back. "Yes, buddy. You'll see her, but it'll be in a way that makes sure you're safe and comfortable. No more surprises, okay?" He nodded, relieved. "Okay, Dad." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I'm glad it's you here, every day." Those words stayed with me. As much as I'd fought for custody, hearing my son say that gave it all a new depth. My kids needed stability, needed a home where they could just be kids, and I was determined to give them that. After a few weeks, I reached out to Elsa again, but this time it wasn't about court filings or evidence. I wanted to thank her properly. We met up at a quiet cafe downtown, away from the courtroom and all the tension that had brought us together. "I don't know how to thank you," I said as we sat down, sipping our coffees. "You didn't just help me legally, you gave me and my kids our lives back." Elsa smiled, a warm, genuine expression I hadn't seen much during the intensity of the case. "Shanti, you fought for them with everything you had. I just helped. Honestly, I wish I'd known the truth about Rick sooner. I might have been able to avoid a lot of pain too." That was the first time Elsa had hinted at her own struggles. I knew her marriage to Rick had been anything but easy after she'd found out about his betrayal. But now, like me, she seemed ready to move forward. We started meeting up more often, sometimes for coffee, other times to bring our kids together for an afternoon at the park. Our shared experiences created an unexpected bond between us. It wasn't romantic, not yet anyway, but it was something real, something honest. Elsa was a rock for me, and over time, I hoped I could be one for her too. As the months passed, things gradually found a rhythm. The firm stabilized, my focus returning to the projects I'd let slide while dealing with the chaos. I even began hiring a few new architects, ones who shared my vision and drive, and who I could trust. Without Rick around, the firm actually began to thrive, expanding into areas we'd only talked about before. And then, as life settled, a new idea took root. One afternoon, Carrie asked me if I'd ever thought about helping other families dealing with betrayal, like ours. It was an offhand question, but it planted a seed. I realized that what we'd been through could help others. People in situations like mine often felt isolated, afraid to speak out, afraid of the fallout. If I could offer them support, real support with resources and guidance, maybe I could turn this whole mess into something meaningful. I told Carrie about the idea, and her eyes lit up. "You mean like a foundation or something?" "Exactly," I said, smiling. "A place for people to find help, to know they're not alone." And that's how the idea for the foundation began. Over the next several weeks, I worked on setting it up, enlisting Elsa's help with the legal aspects. The kids even helped come up with a name, the New Hope Foundation. It felt right, like a fresh start not just for us, but for anyone who needed it. At our launch event, Elsa stood by my side, holding a microphone as she introduced the foundation to the small crowd we'd gathered. I could see pride in her eyes, and in that moment, I knew we'd both come a long way from where we'd started. We weren't just rebuilding from the rubble, we were creating something new and solid, something lasting. Looking out at the audience that night, seeing my kids smiling in the front row, I felt a deep sense of peace. We'd gone through hell, but we'd come out stronger. And with Elsa by my side, I finally felt ready to move forward, this time with purpose and a sense of gratitude I hadn't known before. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning for all of us. The foundation had grown into something more than I'd ever expected. What started as a simple outreach became a real community for people blindsided by betrayal. We had support groups, legal resources, and even partnerships with local therapists. People came from all around, sometimes driving hours just to have someone listen to them, someone who understood. Every time I saw a person walk into our building with that broken look I knew all too well, I felt more sure that turning our pain into something meaningful was the right path. In between foundation work and managing the firm, my life had found a rhythm again, a good one. But more than anything, it was the time with Elsa and the kids that really brought things back to life. Elsa and I weren't forcing anything, we were just letting things develop as they would. And somehow, it felt like that's what we both needed. We'd both come from betrayal and heartbreak, so the last thing we wanted was to rush into something we weren't ready for. But every quiet moment together, every evening our kids played in the backyard or shared meals around the same table, it felt like we were building something solid and real, step by step. One weekend, we decided to take all the kids out to a lake about an hour from town. It was a place I used to go with Carrie and Tony back when things were simple, back before all the chaos. The lake was peaceful, surrounded by thick woods, with a small beach area perfect for setting up a picnic. Carrie and Tony were thrilled, and Elsa's boys, Evan and Max, were practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. They'd bonded with my kids so quickly, like they'd been waiting for friends just like them. When we got to the lake, the kids charged into the water, shrieking and laughing, splashing around without a care in the world. Elsa and I watched them from a distance, sitting on a blanket with a basket of snacks between us, content just to soak in the moment. After a while, Carrie came running up, dripping wet, and tugged on my arm. "Dad, you and Elsa have to come swim with us." She grinned, that mischievous sparkle in her eye. I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know, kiddo. I think I'm more of a beach guy today." "Oh, come on," she teased, glancing at Elsa, who shrugged with a smile. "Guess we don't have a choice," Elsa said, laughing as she stood up. We joined the kids in the water, and soon enough, we were all splashing each other, playing games, and seeing who could swim the fastest. Elsa and I laughed as much as the kids, letting go of any remaining tension, any lingering shadows from the past. I could feel something shifting between us, something deeper. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living, enjoying, opening up again. After we'd all worn ourselves out, we spread out on the picnic blanket, sharing sandwiches and drinks. The kids were wrapped up in towels, munching on chips, their laughter and banter filling the quiet afternoon air. I leaned back against a tree, watching them, feeling a warmth that was different from any I'd known before. As we sat there, Tony snuggled up to my side, looking up at me. "Dad," he said quietly, "this feels like a family. Like a real family." I felt my heart clench. Looking over, I saw Elsa had overheard. Her eyes softened, and she reached out, giving Tony's hand a gentle squeeze. "It does, doesn't it?" she said softly, smiling. Carrie nodded, looking between us. Maybe we should do this more often," she suggested, her voice tentative, like she was afraid of jinxing the moment. I glanced at Elsa, who nodded, her face reflecting the same feelings I was having. "I think that sounds perfect, Carrie. How about every month?" The kids' faces lit up, and we spent the rest of the day planning out all the places we'd visit together and what we'd do. For the first time in a long while, I felt something solid beneath my feet. This wasn't a forced arrangement or a makeshift solution. It was genuine, something that had grown naturally between us, rooted in shared experiences and trust. As the sun began to set, we packed up and drove home, the kids drifting off to sleep in the back seat. Elsa and I drove in silence for a while, the comfort of it speaking more than words could. When we pulled into Elsa's driveway to drop her and the boys off, she paused, turning to me before getting out. "Shanty, this was a really good day," she said, her voice soft, but with a weight behind it that I understood perfectly. "It was," I agreed, meeting her eyes. "It was more than good." For a moment, we just looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. There was no rush, no need to define anything right now. But we both knew where this was heading, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was ready to embrace it. Elsa squeezed my hand, giving me one last smile before heading into her house with her boys, and I drove home with Carrie and Tony, my heart full. In the following weeks, our lives continued to blend, little by little. Elsa and her boys would come over for dinners, and we'd all go out on weekends. The kids grew closer, and so did we. I'd catch Carrie and Tony asking Elsa for advice on things, or her boys chatting with me about school projects and baseball games. It was all so natural, so right. Then, one evening after a family dinner, Elsa stayed back after the kids had gone to bed. We sat on the back porch, a warm summer breeze around us, both of us just enjoying the stillness. Elsa turned to me, her expression thoughtful. You know, Shanti, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, sitting with you, building a new life with our kids, I'd have laughed. I thought I'd lost everything. But somehow, here we are. I nodded, my heart full of gratitude. I felt the same way. After what happened with Miriam, I didn't think I could trust anyone again. But you've shown me that's possible. For a moment, we just sat there, each lost in our own reflections. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and took her hand, feeling that familiar warmth between us. She looked down at our hands, then back up at me, her eyes filled with emotion. So where does this go from here? She whispered. I looked at her, feeling something I hadn't in a long, long time, hope. Wherever we want it to, I replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. There's no rush. We're building something real here. And that's enough for me. That night, after Elsa left, I stood by the window, looking out at the stars. I'd come from betrayal, loss, and anger, but somehow, life had handed me a new beginning. A family forged not out of convenience but out of choice, of resilience, of love. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new story altogether. And for the first time, I was ready to live it. As summer faded into fall, our blended family found its footing. Each day, our lives intertwined a little more. Elsa and her boys joined us for family dinners more often than not, and soon it became natural for us to spend holidays together, picking pumpkins in October, making Thanksgiving plans, and even setting up a Christmas tree together. The kids had bonded into a close-knit pack, each looking out for the others, and Elsa and I took comfort in watching them grow and thrive. One crisp Saturday morning, Carrie, Tony, Evan, and Max raced out into the yard, gathering leaves for a pile they could jump into, their laughter filling the air. Elsa and I watched from the porch, coffee mugs warming our hands as we sat side by side, wrapped in blankets. At one point, Carrie called out, "Dad. Elsa. You have to come jump with us." I looked over at Elsa, who raised her eyebrows, smirking. "Think you can handle it?" she teased. Laughing, I set my coffee down. "You're on." We spent the next half hour racing with the kids, diving into the leaf piles, burying each other in leaves and laughter. It was so simple, yet it felt like a celebration of everything we'd been through and everything we were building. Elsa and I ended up lying back in the leaves, side by side, breathless from laughter, the kids flopping down beside us. Evan looked over at me, a little shy but with a hopeful expression. "Do you think we could do this every year? Like all of us?" I glanced over at Elsa, who was watching me with that soft, familiar look. I nodded. "Absolutely, Evan. This is just the beginning." That night, after the kids had finally worn themselves out, Elsa stayed late, helping me clean up. Once the dishes were done, we lingered in the kitchen, just talking. The kids were asleep upstairs, and there was a calm quietness around us that felt almost sacred. Elsa turned to me, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "Shanti, I don't know if I've told you this enough, but thank you. You've given me and my boys something I didn't think we'd have again, a real family." I shook my head, taking her hands. "No, Elsa. Thank you. I was in pieces before you helped me put my life back together. You and your boys have given me hope again." She smiled, her eyes glistening, and I felt an urge to just hold her, to give in fully to everything I'd been feeling. So I did. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her, feeling her warmth against me as she held me back. After a long moment, she looked up, and I could see that same hope and emotion in her eyes. Slowly, I leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, lingering kiss that felt like the first step of something new. We pulled back, just looking at each other, both of us smiling. It felt like we'd crossed a threshold, one that we were both finally ready for. In the days that followed, our relationship shifted naturally, deepening without any need for words. The kids seemed to sense it too, though we never made a big announcement or forced any changes. They simply settled into it, treating Elsa and her boys like a permanent part of our lives. As winter approached, Elsa and I made a quiet decision to spend the holidays together, with all our kids under one roof. The boys helped me put up lights around the house, while Carrie and Elsa baked cookies in the kitchen, filling the air with the smell of cinnamon and sugar. On Christmas Eve, we all gathered around the fireplace, each child opening one small gift before bedtime. When they finally went to bed, Elsa and I sat by the fire, just the two of us, letting the warmth and quiet settle over us. She reached for my hand, and we sat like that, both of us savoring a peace we'd fought so hard to find. I never thought I'd get here, I murmured, almost to myself. She squeezed my hand, her voice soft. Me neither. But I'm so glad we did. That night, as we sat in the glow of the fire, I realized how far I'd come from the pain and betrayal that had once shattered my life. Here I was, with Elsa by my side, our kids upstairs, laughter and love filling the spaces that had once felt empty. We'd come through so much, but we'd done it together. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, I knew, this was what a real family felt like. This was what healing looked like. And as I held Elsa's hand, I felt ready to step into a future I could finally embrace, with love, hope, and gratitude for the life we were building together. New Year's Eve rolled around, and Elsa and I decided to mark it as the official start of our new life together. We hosted a small gathering at my place, just us, the kids, and a handful of close friends from the foundation. It felt fitting to celebrate with the people who'd been there through everything, who understood the journey from heartbreak to healing. The house was filled with warmth, laughter, and music, the kids running around in their party hats, eager to stay up until midnight. They'd built a fort in the living room out of blankets and pillows, calling it the family castle. Elsa and I exchanged a smile when we saw it, a simple but powerful symbol of how far we'd come. As the night went on, Elsa and I took a moment for ourselves, standing on the back porch under the cold, clear sky, watching the stars. She took a deep breath, her breath visible in the chilly air. This time last year I was so lost, she said softly, gazing up at the sky. I never thought I'd find this kind of peace, much less a family. I slipped my arm around her, pulling her close. Same here. I couldn't have imagined this. But I wouldn't change a thing. Elsa looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. You've given my boys a home again, Shanti. And you've given me hope. You've done the same for me, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. Inside, we heard the countdown start. 10, 9, 8. The kids' voices grew louder, giggling and shouting with excitement. Elsa and I went back in, joining everyone as we counted down the last seconds of the year. When the clock struck midnight, the room exploded with cheers, laughter, and confetti poppers. I pulled Elsa into my arms, and we shared a kiss, our first New Year's kiss, and the beginning of what I knew would be many more. Around us, the kids laughed and hugged each other, and I saw Carrie, Tony, Evan, and Max exchange grins and high fives, fully embracing each other as siblings. Then, Carrie raised her glass of sparkling cider, her face glowing with a joy that made my heart swell. To our family, she said, her voice strong and full of love. To our family, we all echoed, glasses raised, voices blending in harmony. As the night wound down, we tucked the kids into their makeshift fort, all of them curled up together, exhausted from the excitement of the evening. Elsa and I stood in the doorway, watching them sleep, a deep contentment settling over us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering, "This is everything, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling the truth of it deep in my bones. Yeah, it really is. In the quiet that followed, I realized that every struggle, every hard-fought moment of the past year had led us to this. It wasn't just about finding love again or rebuilding from the ashes. It was about creating something new, something better, a family bound by choice, by resilience, and by a love that had grown slowly but surely, one step at a time. As I stood there, Elsa by my side, our kids asleep in the next room, I knew this was the life I'd been searching for. And with each passing day, I was ready to embrace every new beginning, every small moment, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Our new life, our new family, it was all just beginning. And for the first time, I was ready for it all.